Now have finally a chief executive candidate in Mr. John Lee, who's come forth to stand so far as the only candidate, it seems, that's been nominated by the majority of the electors out of the committee. So I was just wondering, given that you're also one of the folks who nominated Mr. John Lee, could you perhaps start by telling us about your thoughts and your impressions of John, and also your hopes and wishes for ideally what he could bring forth to our city?
Well, I maybe before I go to John Lee, maybe I start on Carrie Lam and the progression into John Lee. Of course, when Carrie came to run for election 5 years ago, I was part of her campaign. She was my chair lady in West Kowloon for 6 years, and I was her chairman in Ocean Park for 6 years. So I'd worked closely with Carrie. I just thought to myself that, when President Xi kind of picked Carrie as the anointed one to go forward, she was retiring, actually. She wasn't going to run for election, but she decided she will run. So I decided to, I was originally going to help Regina Epp, and Regina kind of Beijing came and said, we want Carrie. And so I said, no problem. I said, I said, we'll do whatever we can to help Carrie. And she started off well at the beginning, but Carrie is Carrie. Carrie is someone that believes she was always the top in her class, and she always believes that she knows better than anyone else. Being a politician, as you all know, all over the world, Canada, US, UK, everywhere, Hong Kong, you have to really be shown to be a politician. You have to be shown to be listening to the people. It's a position that you're in, and society in every country needs their leaders in order to make a better life for themselves. And basically, the problem was Carrie has been an AO, an administrative officer, for 42 years now, most of her life. She went from university straight into government and never really worked out in a private company, private business world. There's a vast difference between administrative system and private company, and so the problem was, I don't want to talk badly about about most of the people. The civil service, we have 184,000 civil servants at the moment, and it's a carryover from the British days, whereby civil servants are very good following rules, because that's basically the training that they've had. And in good market, when a market is good, when we don't have COVID or these kind of disasters that affect the world, following regulations is actually very, very good. You want that kind of thing. But when you have these kind of tragedies, viruses that happen all over the world, disruptions in the world, you have to think out of the box, and you've got to take decisions. Carrie, unfortunately, followed the rules for everything and alienated a lot of the people. Probably at the moment, she is probably, I would say, she has one of the least popularity votes among all the citizens, basically by doing, I think, what she thought Beijing wants her to do, and not really understanding that Beijing has their own problems, and they really leave Hong Kong alone. Just fix your problems and don't bother us, and that's basically, I'm joking, but I mean, realistically, they don't need more headaches coming from Hong Kong. Obviously, Hong Kong has gone through many problems. In actually 25 years of one country, two systems is coming up right now, and we can see that one country, two systems was something that Deng Xiaoping in the 80s came up with, because at that time, everybody was worried about Hong Kong going from the UK back to China, and people, were panicking, basically, which is understandable. And this little guy comes up with this thing that don't worry, one country, two systems, you'll still have your system, and not a problem. And that kind of solved, everybody was very, very happy to hopefully have their system intact. What happened was, no country in the world has ever done one country, two systems. Hong Kong was the first one. There is no preamble, there's no model for it. We are the experiment, one country, two systems. And so it started off very, very well. And people, 97 came, many people left Hong Kong, many people went to Canada, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, others went to UK, others went to Australia. And so there was a migration out, because some people still didn't trust China and what was going on in China, because they didn't really know China. They knew the old China. And then we went through a number of problems in Hong Kong. After 97, the big problem we had was the education system, where Tung Chee-hwa was the first chief executive. He, at that time, did not allow, he decided to have liberal studies instead of national education, and teaching young kids about China, and now is one country, two systems, and one country comes first, two systems come second. Hong Kong people thought two systems comes first, one country comes second. And obviously, so there was this disruption, and obviously that led to Occupy Central, where Joshua Wong, this young student, suddenly took the lead and became a hero amongst the young, and they didn't want to have national education, because liberal studies teachers could teach whatever they wanted. And when I grew up in Canada, I mean, every morning I was in Quebec and Montreal, saluting the British flag and singing "God Save the Queen." And in the U.S., you used to put your hand on your heart and pledge allegiance to the flag. And it was a different world, In Hong Kong, we never saluted the flag. The kids in school didn't salute flags, and so that was a problem. But Occupy Central came along, and because of the passive nature of the law enforcement in Hong Kong, they let it go for 79 days, blocking Gloucester Road. I used to go down there because I'm a hero for the kids, because of Ocean Park and things I've done. They all want to take pictures with me, but it was like being in a university campus. They were just out on the street and kind of empowered this newfound protest. And it was very, very sad. At the end of the day, the police moved in and finally had to break it up. And so what happened was that along came after that, Article 23 was not passed in 2003. They said 500,000 people, or whatever the numbers were, that took to the streets to not pass Article 23, which again was a mistake. And then we went along with that up to 2019. We had, and the problem was we had pan-Democrats and pro-Beijing in LegCo. LegCo is the engine that really can change people's lives, can really pass bills to give people a better life, as every parliament in the world has. But the problem was LegCo was stuck because our pan-Democrats, who had many of the young people in there, really saw a different way. And many were financed by foreign influence, foreign countries, which goes around the world, one of them being the US, that NED, National Endowment for Democracy, which supports a lot of these so-called democratic groups that require funding. And this was a problem for Hong Kong because Hong Kong was very passive, always a place apolitical, not political at all, and always a place that people could, just live their life. Everything was fine. But LegCo was stuck. Bills were not getting passed. The problem was the Pan-Democrats, they kept stopping everything. Bills that should have taken 1 week, 2 weeks to pass in the finance committee were taking up to 4 months, 5 months, some even as long as 6 months. And antics that were practiced that I never grew up with, where the Pan-Democrats, some of the rebels were standing on their table and causing disruptions within the LegCo chambers. It was a mess. And and China really stood by and watched what was happening. And it really gave young people the wrong impression of what it means to really be a good citizen for Hong Kong and really get Hong Kong going. In the meantime, China kept advancing. I mean, the life in China, I'd been in China for 45 years. I had my first office in Changsha, Hunan 45 years ago, when it was really communist, basically. That was the birthplace of Chairman Mao. And I kind of grew up there in my adult life. So I watched the changes taking place in China. And that's why I really admired what was going on. I understood it more than most Hong Kong people, because many did not want to go to China. And for me, it was really something that was just amazing to watch it. In 2008, I decided, I had a Canadian passport, and I decided that I've had enough. I haven't really gone back to Canada in many years. I didn't even know who the prime minister was, basically. And I just thought to myself, I'm local. I know China, I know Hong Kong. And I decided to change my passport and have a Chinese passport. And of course, China was very pleased at the time. It made headlines everywhere. But I felt very happy to do that. I had to give up my Canadian passport. Canadian government thought it was crazy. It took me 8 months. They thought I was totally insane, because many Hong Kong people were changing their passport to Canadian. But I just felt that I could see the future of China. I can see the growth of China and how Hong Kong could really benefit from it. And so it caused problems for me sometimes when I went abroad internationally. My passport, my nationality says Chinese. And of course, my face is Guilo, is Western. And the immigration officer would look at me and say, "You're not Chinese." And I'd say, well, it's a genetic problem. It was easily explainable to them. But I felt very proud, and I do feel very proud to have a Chinese nationality. In the meantime, during the things of Hong Kong, the culmination was 2019. And this is where John Lee comes in, where I'll bring him into the picture. John Lee, 2019 comes along, and many young people decide to protest in Hong Kong because Carrie Lam decides to pass an extradition treaty, which is the right thing to do, together with John Lee, who was the head of security at the time, and the Secretary for Security. And she decides that, we need to pass an extradition treaty with China, that if there's some disruption in Hong Kong, people can get sent back to China. Of course, that caused a huge stir in Hong Kong. But the problem, and that was not China's rules. That was something that Carrie came up with herself, basically. Many people blame China, whatever, the Pan-Democrats for sure. But at the end, the problem she had was that Carrie stayed with that. Instead of listening and seeing that people were angry and upset about it and trying to sell it in the right way, Carrie's used to, these are the regulations, these are the rules. That's administrative officer, that's what they do. And she refused to give in for about 3 months. That caused the culmination of 2019, the protests in the streets. where people started protesting, young people started protesting, with help, of course, from many foreign forces. I myself was being interviewed by many of the foreign press here, and because my Western face, they thought I was going to say bad things about Hong Kong and China, how China was behind all this. I would not say that, because it wasn't. And many of the local young reporters for local newspapers were coming to see me and to do interviews. And some of them were my friends, and they said they're going to quit the company. They're going to quit being a reporter. I said, why? They said, because I can work on the front lines and get 7,000 to 8,000 Hong Kong dollars for being on the front line and causing disruptions in the protests. And I said, don't be crazy. Don't do that. That's your life, that's criminal. But that was money that was being processed both by certain Hong Kong groups and also foreign forces, paying money for these frontline people. This was not Hong Kong, and went on for like 9 months. It was very scary for many people, very, very difficult time. China, on the other hand, at that time was very clever. The world was trying to force China to send the PLA into Hong Kong. But China was really clever. China decided no. They had the PLA, if needed, right in Shenzhen, which they can send them over in a short period of time if it needed to be. But what China did was write a security law. Since we did not pass Article 23, they decided to write a security law and spend 6 months with the security law. And at the end of the protests, also the Hong Kong, the police department had, Stephen Low was the chief of police at the time, and he was retiring. And unfortunately, he was not used to this kind of protests, and it was quite ineffective. They brought at that time, they promoted Chris Tang, PK Tang, who is now the head of security in Hong Kong, Secretary for Security. Chris Tang was very, very forceful, had the respect of his officers, and really was able to bring some semblance of normality back to Hong Kong, arresting a lot of these young people, a lot of these agitators that were causing the problems, and the pan-democrats that were really behind a lot of this disruptions, as many had been in Occupy Central. But Occupy Central was much more peaceful. This really morphed into something very, very bad. And then John Lee, of course, was the one when the security law came in. John Lee was the Secretary for Security at the time. And he was the one that said, and Carrie Lam, we have to institute this. This is very, very important. Of course, Hong Kong got criticized around the world for having a security law. And this was China taking back control of Hong Kong. Hong Kong, the international free market, financial center of the world, international financial center of the world. And now security law would really stop all of our freedoms. And of course, some of the pan-democrats were saying the same thing. But yet, there's 200 countries around the world. Out of 200 countries, 120 countries have security law. And many, many of these reporters never really even read the security law. If they read the security law, US, I think, has 20 security laws. UK has security laws. I've read the security law versus, say, the UK security law or the American security law. It's a lot more tame than some of the security laws around the world in these so-called democratic societies, Western countries. But it brought stability to Hong Kong. And John Lee at the time was very, very strong, and of course hated by a lot of these agitators who are now in jail. Some are in jail, and some are waiting for to be tried for and Apple Daily, which was one of the newspapers owned by Jimmy Lai, was also an agitator. They went to the United States to try to get the United States to sanction Hong Kong, which was a very bad thing to do. And I've said this publicly. Imagine if the United States, if 3 or 4 American business people or owners of newspapers went to Beijing and asked Beijing to sanction the United States, bring sanctions against the United States. If those people went back to the United States, they wouldn't get put in jail. They'd probably get killed, sentenced to death, for treason. And so Hong Kong went through all these problems, and many people did leave. Many agitators ran away, are now living abroad in UK, Australia, Canada, other places. John Lee comes in, and the election coming up, May 8th, the Chinese government decided to change LegCo. In the past, LegCo had 1,200 seats in LegCo. They've expanded it to 1,500 seats, and the Chinese government has decided, and everyone who runs for LegCo must be a patriot. Nothing wrong with that. U.S. Again, you have to pledge allegiance. LegCo members, they're people, and in the UK, you also have to pledge allegiance to the government. And so that's what China wanted. Of course, they got criticized by Western powers, but John Lee was one, together with Carrie Lam, that got this through and was able to create stability in Hong Kong, which businesses really needed. Because because a lot of media is very, very, very bad against Hong Kong. They write the worst stories you can imagine. I do a lot of foreign media, and many times I just take what I say out of context and present it in another way, so that their readers or their listeners can really hear how bad Hong Kong and China is. There's really against China. And so that was really something that really upset me a lot. And when I do foreign media, I'm very careful in what I say. And so at the end of the day, John Lee comes along, and Carrie Lam did not, we had, of course, COVID, which everyone else in the world had. Hong Kong, during the COVID had three kinds. The Alpha Delta virus, which was a virus into the lungs, and Hong Kong actually was able to control it very well. China came up with this thing, Dynamic Zero, which this rule, which they thought, people originally thought that you want to get zero cases, which is not really correct. What Dynamic Zero stands for is that as soon as you have an eruption, you kind of try to contact trace it and stop it before it expands. The only way to help is with vaccinations, and that's something that's very, very important. It's no different than the flu and the flu vaccines, which comes yearly. And so for Alpha Delta, Hong Kong did a very, very good job, along with China as well. They closed the borders, the international borders, and the border between China has been closed. And we were able to contact trace, to really do Dynamic Zero as soon as it broke out, because it transmits quite slowly because it's in the lungs, and not a problem. So we basically had almost zero with both viruses. We had almost zero cases, very, very limited cases in Hong Kong, because we were able to contact trace it. And at the end of the two years, we had 213 deaths, which which everything was fine. We thought our healthcare system was fine. Everything was very, very good. But unfortunately, Omicron came along, and Omicron hit all the world first: UK, US, Europe, everywhere, South Africa. And Omicron came from South Africa. And the problem was Omicron is an upper respiratory disease, which affects the throat and the nose. And that transmits very, very, very quickly. And so if you want to use contact tracing for it, it's almost impossible, because it transmits too quickly. You can just be in the same room with someone and breathe the air and you'll catch it. But the good thing about, and there's Omicron 1 and Omicron 2, BA1 and BA2. And so Europe and US and UK got BA1 first. And in Hong Kong, we thought we can do the same thing and be the heroes as we had of the virus, as we had with Alpha Delta, with almost 0 cases. The biggest problem we had was the care homes, the elderly care homes. We have over 1,000 in Hong Kong, and the elderly did not want to get vaccinated. A lot of their family members said, "Oh, I'm 80 years old. There's no point getting vaccinated. We've done such a good job during Alpha Delta." Everybody was lulled into satisfactory. Even the younger people, just nobody saw a need for vaccination. The government was trying to. We were very fortunate. We had 2 vaccines, Sinovac and BioNTech, and government was trying their best to get people vaccinated free. Many countries, US, UK, they didn't have the vaccinations, and people had to wait but here we did, but people just didn't want to get vaccinated because it was they were successful. Omicron comes along, and we were the laggard, the last one. Well, China's actually the last one. We're the second last in the world to get Omicron. But the Omicron we've gotten, we skipped BA1, Omicron 1. We have Omicron 2, basically. And so we were lucky. We followed the pattern where everywhere else in the world. Because we were vaccinated, many people started to get vaccinated. The big problem we had was the elderly care homes where people were not vaccinated. It got into the care homes, and it was like a fire. It just killed a lot of people. China, of course, was very unhappy with the results. Because they also, I don't believe, understood the Omicron. They also thought Alpha Delta, they've done so well, the borders are closed, and they've tried to suppress it. They came up with that dynamic 0. Everyone else in the world became political terminology or living with it. What happened, basically, the world wanted, the only way to do is get vaccinated and suppress it. So the Western countries used the terminology, we're going to suppress it. We need vaccinations, and they also had problems, anti-vaxxers, all that kind of thing. Had problems getting people vaccinated, but they tried to suppress it. They didn't call it dynamic 0, but basically suppression is the same as dynamic 0. But China gave it the name dynamic 0. It became a political thing. And then UK, Boris Johnson was the one when restaurants, bars, everything was closed. Boris Johnson comes up with the phrase, it's opening up now because the numbers are coming down after the peak, and we're going to live with it. And then the US picked up that terminology, we're going to live with it. And of course, China stuck with their dynamic 0. President Xi came out and said, no, that we have to, for us, human life is more important than having people die and living with it. So we have to find a way to really suppress it. And in Hong Kong, we never had to. Well, there was a lot of talk about locking up people in their homes and really testing and universal testing. And in China, of course, they just locked down, and we see the problems going on in Shanghai and Shenzhen at the moment. It's very, very difficult. John Lee comes along. Meantime, an election is supposed to take place. Carrie Lam thought that she can run again. She wanted another 5 years. She kept telling the press, I have no intention, I'm not saying anything, because she was waiting for the go-ahead from Beijing to run another 5 years. She didn't want to lose face. And basically what happened was about 2 weeks ago, she was summoned to Shenzhen because of the virus. We had to delay the election, which we did until May 8th for the election, but the nomination, and also have the nomination period delayed. And what happened was she went to see Xia Baolong, who's the head of the Hong Kong Macau Affairs Office in Beijing. He was in Shenzhen because Hong Kong during the Omicron, our hospital system was totally overwhelmed. We had a lot of deaths. The older people in care homes could not make it to the hospital. There was no beds. And it really caused today the death rate is from 213 is over 9,000, mostly the elderly who were not vaccinated. And so China had to help Hong Kong. The healthcare system, the public hospital system, was overcrowded. There was no beds. People who came down with it in the care homes, the older people with pre-existing conditions, couldn't even get to a hospital. And so they just passed on. And it was very, very terrible. Carrie Lam, of course, felt very, very bad. But Beijing was furious, and they helped out. They sent a lot of their experts to Hong Kong. We built isolation facilities. We now have 70,000 isolation facilities. They built isolation facility in 1 week. No other country in the world can build holding, 1,000, 2,000, a building holding 1,200, 2,000 patients as an isolation center. But the international borders have been closed. The border with China has been closed. It's caused a lot of problems to Hong Kong. And in the meantime, she goes to Shenzhen and meets with Xia Balong, and so does John Lee. And she was expecting to get the go-ahead to run again. And China said, thank you very much for 5 years, but we're not giving you the go-ahead, sorry. Of course, she didn't tell the public that. She was told the public that my family doesn't want me to run, and this is something that I'm just giving you some inside information that didn't hit the newspapers, and so it's unfortunate that her heart is in the right place, but unfortunately, she took a lot of blame for the regulations and the way she handled COVID-5. Really caused a lot of problems for many, many, many people, many families. Businesses were shut down, many, many problems. And I wrote I WhatsApp with Carrie a lot. And when the things were really, really getting bad, I decided to send her a WhatsApp just telling her that this cannot go on. We have people leaving Hong Kong, mothers, children, schools are closed, all these problems. The international community just did not see a future for Hong Kong. They're very, very worried. And as well, a mother, an expat mother, was separated from her 11-month-old daughter who had caught the virus and was in the hospital. But there was no hospital beds. The mother, of course, wanted to spend time with the child, because it's very traumatic, but she couldn't. And she was separated. It was the wrong decision by the hospital authority. And at that time, that headline went around the world. Hong Kong is not a safe place. If a child gets COVID, that the parent will be separated from their child. So don't go. The U.S. government sent a directive out to their citizens around the world saying, don't travel to Hong Kong because you will get separated from your child. When Carrie found out about it, she was very, very upset. And of course, the hospital authority realized they didn't have hospital beds, but then bringing in the private hospitals as well, trying to get hospital beds from private hospitals. They were very slow to react to everything. China finally really saved our life by building all these isolation facilities and bringing in the experts, both using Western medicine and then Chinese medicine, which has worked in China, to really give the suggestion. And rather than locking up everybody for originally 1 day or 2 days, because the problem was they were getting mixed messages from the government. Every government official, Sophia Chan, who's the head of the health department, she was coming out and saying that Carrie Lam first said, we're not going to have mass testing, and we're not going to lock people up in their home for a long time. And everybody breathed a sigh of relief. The next thing, 4 days later, Sophia Chan comes out and says, well, we're thinking about locking up people for 21 days in their home. Hong Kong is a place that people live in subdivided flats, very, very small homes, and it caused a lot of anxiety for many, many people. Finally, I wrote a WhatsApp message to Carrie Lam saying, Carrie, this cannot go on. We get mixed messages from the government. The public is very confused and they don't know what to believe or who to believe. And it's causing a lot of problem here. People are leaving because mothers just decided to pick up their children and leave Hong Kong, and families, the same thing. We had a 21-day quarantine during Alpha Delta for people coming here. For international businesses, it doesn't work. You can't have executives who need to travel to Hong Kong to be in quarantine for 21 days. And so eventually it got reduced to 14 days, and then we're pushing 7 days. But I pushed Carrie Lam to come out every day, which she did at 11 a.m. to give a press conference to really to set the record straight, that have one spokesperson. And unfortunately, that WhatsApp that I sent to her went viral. Someone got a hold of it and sent it to social media, and everyone in Hong Kong read it, and they're very much behind it. But it really did help to change the government. To Carrie sent me a message the next morning saying, I'll look into it, and you're right. And so it helped a lot, and that was kind of the turning point. So when she went to Shenzhen with John Li, she was expecting to get the go-ahead to run again. Shabalong said to her, thank you, but Beijing has decided you will not be running. And then John Li, they've decided will be the candidate, the official candidate. And they didn't want more than one candidate because the time was very, very short. The nominations are actually just finishing today, two-week nomination, and then the voting is May 8th, which is a really short time. So you don't have time like Carrie had for debating and that kind of thing with a second candidate. Also divided the community, the pro-Beijing groups. And so they thought this time we'll have a single candidate, not unlike what Macau has from the time from 1999 when they went back to China. They have always had a single candidate, and it worked for Macau. I'm not saying this will continue for Hong Kong, but for now, I've supported that. I've thought it's the right thing to do. And so John Li became the candidate, and he decided to he got out of, there's 1,446 members of the election committee who can vote. And out of the nomination, they needed, he got over 786 nominations, which was much more. You basically needed five votes from five nominations from 5 different groups that the government had set up, that Beijing had set up, and totally of 188 votes, but he got 786 votes and nominations, which has been very, very good. And he's obviously has been going around and now canvassing because for the election for May 8th. During his speech to the reporters and his first public address, he basically no security. He's not really knows finance that well because he hasn't really worked on it. But the good thing about John Li, he goes back a long time with the government. He comes from a poor family. He was originally got accepted to Hong Kong U as a student when he was graduating for engineering. But because his family was so poor, he decided to go out and work rather than go to university at the time, and really became a probation officer was his first job in security, and then went into the police force and really rose through the ranks to chief superintendent and then secretary for security and assistant commissioner. And so his whole life he's been involved with security and involved with Beijing. It's something that Beijing really likes. And when Matthew Chung, who was the chief secretary, finished his term, they made 6 months ago, he was elevated to chief secretary. And that's kind of a message that Beijing really had places for him to go. And we can see Carrie was very upset, obviously, when she was told that she won't get another 5 years and John Lee will. He was not always her favorite person, but no problem. So John has put a team together, most of them, majority from LegCo members who are the Patriots, and very good. And actually that team was put together by the liaison office to help John, and they're helping him a lot. And he's really been someone who has came up with three things: results orientated, something that market orientated. It's very important for him to achieve results quickly, not get cut down in bureaucracy, which needs to be changed. Housing is very, very important. Keeping Hong Kong competitive, it's another thing that he wants to do. And of course, housing is a big, big problem in Hong Kong, and that has to be addressed. But the problem is, because of the bureaucracy that we inherited from the British days, it takes 7 years, 8 years to build a house, which should be no more than 3 years. I mean, China does it in a week. And so, but because of the bureaucracy and public consultation, all these things, it really slowed down the growth and really made the life of many, many people in Hong Kong very, very negative. Young people just don't see a future for themselves, and they worry a lot. And so John comes along, and of course, May 8th, we expect him to get elected and to form a cabinet for the chief, for the CE, chief executive elections. And the cabinet is important, that each member of the different sectors is very strong. Carrie, unfortunately, surrounded herself. She had problems attracting top people in the different portfolios. And that was a problem, because she's the kind of person that likes to do everything herself and works very, very hard. But you can't, in any private business, in any company, you need to have a chairman or a CEO who really involves everyone and has very, very key people in each position. And that makes you strong or weak. And that's something that John Lee now has to put together. I believe he will. Carrie has set up a framework before for simplifying some of the structures. Before, transport and housing was under one portfolio, which is very important. Both are really important. Transport is important, and housing, one portfolio, cannot help Hong Kong. It just, people get bogged down with too many regulations and rules. They want to cut through that. Now with the LegCo, bills are getting passed. It's all pro-Beijing LegCo members. Bills are getting passed, and Hong Kong, we just had a record number of bills passed, which had not happened since 1997. And now government can pass regulations and do things for Hong Kong people to give them a better life. This is really something that is very, very, very important. And so we're now trying to see if the cabinet he can put together and simplifying the procedures and all that, making things quicker so that you don't have 200,000 people waiting for a housing, for subsidized housing, which has been going on. They're waiting up to 7 years. And of course, young people, today, everything that we're living in a world of technology. And so Hong Kong needs to change. We can see what's happened across the border in Shenzhen. We have, it became, I was there when Deng Xiaoping, it was field everywhere. And Deng Xiaoping said, this is going to be a special economic zone. And I thought, this guy's crazy. It was all field and mud. Well, if you go to Shenzhen today, it's just incredible. It's further ahead than Silicon Valley. Technology, is the future of the world, especially for young people. And Hong Kong fell behind in technology. We were once the leaders again, with China. China has far surpassed us. At one time, Hong Kong was here, China was here. Today, China's here and Hong Kong stayed stuck. And hopefully we can get to this point. And that's something that's very, very important that China wants. China needs a one country, two system. They need Hong Kong. People are worried about the future of Hong Kong, what will happen to Hong Kong. I can tell you, China has said it very, very clearly to both Carrie Lam. They just said it 3 weeks ago during the Beijing CCCP meetings, the National Congress meetings, where they said, remember, Hong Kong government, Hong Kong is an international financial center. It needs to stay that because Hong Kong is the super connector between the West and the East and the East and the West. And China needs that because China has 1.4 billion people. They don't need another 7.5 million people, Hong Kong, as a Chinese city. They derive a lot of benefit from Hong Kong. And Hong Kong needs to continue to do that. Something that's very, very important. And Beijing demands it. We need to keep that internationalism. China wants Hong Kong to be international so that we can do things in the future. The future, and people ask, well, what's the future of Hong Kong? Where's Hong Kong going to go? Well, the future of Hong Kong is very straight. Unfortunately, the virus, the COVID, really, stopped everywhere in the world. Most countries now in the world have decided to live with it, and their economies are going. Many countries, though, it's starting up again in certain places because we had BA2, COVID, Omicron 2, but the other countries had Omicron 1, and they're getting Omicron 2 now, and they'll go through it. But Hong Kong, I think in the future, we will be lucky because approximately 4.5 million people in Hong Kong have been infected. And although the government records show 1.27 million, 1,270,000, but because many people who got it, the majority, just stayed home. They didn't want to go to isolation facilities. They didn't report it to the government. And the hospitals were overwhelmed and it didn't have enough beds. So that's the records that they show. But in looking at what University of Hong Kong has come up with, they estimate 4.6 million people have already got it. Also vaccinations, because when it hit, people started to get vaccinated really quickly. So the first vaccine, almost 93% of the people have taken the first vaccines, 86% the second vaccine, and 65% the third vaccine. And they're now advocating for people a fourth vaccine. Carrie Lam and Sophia Chan yesterday took a fourth vaccine at the Central Library. For the elderly above 60, the suggestion is to take a fourth vaccine. But because we now have very high vaccination rate, and also because more than half the population has been infected, if we get a sixth wave, it won't be as bad as before, when not many people are vaccinated, and because people already have the antibodies against it. So that's something that we can look forward to, that we will not have the problem. But now, because of it, and because of my letter, Carrie has decided that on next Thursday, on the 21st of April, restaurants can be open again for dinner. in the past, it was open from 5 a.m. to 6 p.m., only for lunch, 2 people to a table. And of course, businesses could not survive. People had to eat at home in the evening, and many people live in small houses, and it was very difficult. So starting that, we can open for dinner till 10 p.m., which is a first step. And then in May 21st, also gyms will open in the first round, and cinemas and hairdressers, and in the second round, starting May 21st, clubs and bars will be allowed to open, beaches will open again, and so people will start to get a normal life back. And if June 21st, if the infection rate is low, then we'll go back to normal, and we're starting basically to live with it, rather than using the terminology because it's become political. We're opening up, and so that should bring some life back to Hong Kong. In the meantime, though, the international borders and the between China and because China is going through a very difficult period now with the Omicron, and it remains to be seen. I imagine by this summer they should have it under control, possibly before, and the international borders will then start to open up as well, because Hong Kong needs to get a life back. Otherwise, we can't survive. There are now 9 countries where flights were banned from coming to Hong Kong, are now allowed to come, although, again, if an airline, we have something called a circuit breaker. If an airline has more than 3 passengers, only residents of Hong Kong can return right now, no foreigners, no tourists. And so if they have more than 3 people within on the airplane that are infected, they have to close down for a week originally. And so many airlines are not flying out here. So it's become a big problem. I mean, there's many residents who want to come back. We're trying to push the government to relax that, maybe go to 10 infected rather than 3 infected, and hopefully we'll see. John Lee, on the other hand, many people were worried that he's very security minded and doesn't know much about financial, but I served with him while he was chief secretary in his human resources committee. And yes, he might not know a lot of things, but he is very open. He's very bright. He's very open-minded. And I do believe he'll do a very, very good job. He will listen to the people. He knows he comes from a poor family. He knows what it is to be poor. He knows what many grassroots in Hong Kong are suffering, with. And I think he can really help to make Hong Kong a better place the next 5 years, I believe. And plus, he will pass Article 23, which should have been passed in 2003. That'll help with security, and literally help both China and Hong Kong going forward. Now, the future of Hong Kong, of course, is the Greater Bay Area, the GBA. This is a plan that China came up with pre-COVID. Unfortunately, it got sidelined at the moment because of COVID. But the Greater Bay Area is, for those of you who don't know it, it's 11 cities in southern China, in the Greater Bay Area, and it's within 11 cities, 4 key cities: Hong Kong, Macau, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou, and then 7 peripheral cities in the Pearl River Delta. And basically, they're all 1.5 hours by high-speed rail from Hong Kong. So the whole radius suddenly, Hong Kong's borders suddenly expand. And what happens is that Hong Kong will go, because in that parameter, there's 84 million people, and Hong Kong is 7.5 million people. So our borders will expand to 84 million people within an 1.5 hour radius from Hong Kong, which is really something that's very, very important. And last year they had a GDP of 1.67 trillion US dollars, bigger than the GDP of South Korea. So you have a proximity of people close to you that have a lot of money and big spending power. This will propel foreign governments, business people who want to do business in the Greater Bay Area, to come to Hong Kong and set up in Hong Kong, because the strength of Hong Kong is our independent judiciary, our common law system, which is different than what China practices the civil law system. Common law is more prevalent around the world, so people trust the common law system very well. That's the strength of Hong Kong. That's why China needs Hong Kong with the common law system. It's very difficult for China to change their legal system at the moment. And as well, the prognosis is that Kerry came up with something very good, Northern Metropolis, which is really moving the center. In the past, everything was centered around the center part of Hong Kong. Now we're talking about the Northern Metropolis, which is on the border of Shenzhen, and really Hong Kong and Shenzhen becoming brother and sister. The airplane with two engines, one Hong Kong, one Shenzhen, and really Hong Kong becoming much more digitalized. That Hong Kong technology becomes a very important facet for Hong Kong, which we've been very far behind, because for us, it was the property market. Many of the developers here, because of the system of land auctions, which were from the British, caused land prices to be very, very, very high. We keep saying we don't have land, but we have plenty of land. It's just changing regulations quickly. Even taking 1 or 2% of country parks overnight will give you enough land to house everybody in a decent house, and not have these what I call nano flats, small flats of 90 or 100 square feet, which is ridiculous. At least the government now has said, okay, it'll be smallest one will be 250 square feet. I would still go to 400 square feet. Singapore, who has much stricter laws than Hong Kong, is being at the moment. Everybody's looking to Singapore because as many companies are going there to set up, and many young people are going to Singapore and UK and other places because of our closed borders and people who can't travel. Like Brian is now going to the UK, but it's just difficult for many young people. But I think the Greater Bay Area will help. Singapore, Li Kuan Yew is very smart. He made sure that 90% of the population owned their own home. And he had subsidized housing. And if people, according to your salary, he was able to skew the mortgage so that your payments could be enough for 99 years, 90 years, whatever it was, long term, but at least you owned your own home. So even though the laws are much stricter in Singapore, people really love the government, they love their life. Hong Kong needs, and that's something that China's Xi Jinping has warned the government, that you have to make Hong Kong people have a better life. My staff, and I have many companies in China, my staff in China have a better life than they have in Hong Kong. They live in bigger flats, they have a car, they travel a lot. It's not the old China. China is the fastest growing economy in the world. And believe me, those of you that believe it, in the next 10 years, China will be #1 in the world. It's the second largest economy in the world, but China will continue to grow stronger and stronger. And Hong Kong, as China grows, Hong Kong will grow along with it. Many people, because of the virus, have left Hong Kong, many families. When the border opens, many schools are opening now, starting in next week. Some families will come back again, will bring their children back again. Others will stay away. But I've been through this exodus many, many times. In '97, and after 1 or 2 years, many people come back. And those people that don't come back will stay abroad, but new people will come as long as the opportunities are there. And I know that will be really something very, very special. So I see I'm getting from everyone, thank you for a wonderful speech. Sorry, Brian, but I talk a lot. You didn't have a lot of chance to moderate, I guess. But I just think once you get started, I may as well tell the real story of Hong Kong and the future of Hong Kong. But of course, Brian, it's your show, so I'm open to questions, of course, Q&A for anybody that has it, or whatever questions you have.
Thank you so much, Alan. You gave us a lot of food for thought, so please don't apologize. It was a fantastic opening address, and also one that certainly demarcates the beginning of a new era in Hong Kong politics. So please, thank you very much. So there's so much I wanted to unpack from your fantastic speech there, but I guess what I want to start with is a question concerning COVID policy, and specifically with respect to the future trajectory for Hong Kong in the 6 months and year ahead. Because as I see it, it strikes me that there's a bifurcation increasingly in approach to COVID coming from the mainland and a world at large, really, where many countries around the world are not just reopening, but also adopting a vaccination-driven and targeted care-centered approach to handling the pandemic rather than sort of hospitalizing and isolating everyone and all found to test positive for the virus. Whereas in mainland, especially as evidenced by Shanghai, but also last night, news coming out of Xi'an as well, it strikes us that there's this emphasis upon not necessarily eliminating any and all COVID, but certainly ensuring that any and all folks who test positive are isolated and are treated. And the undergirding philosophy cited by the mainland Chinese officials is that they want to put lives at the center and forefront of the pandemic policies. So Hong Kong, we're kind of caught in the middle here because politically or for reasons to do with cross-border travel and economic trade, we would like to reopen, of course, the border, so to speak, between us and the mainland because we're part of the country. And yet, as you noted quite correctly just then, we're also an international financial center. Expats, bankers, folks, investors, high net worth individuals, they're sick of the quarantine and the waiting periods that would inevitably confront them as they come to Hong Kong. Yet, as the border reopening task with the mainland becomes an utmost priority over the next 6 months, if we assume that's indeed going to happen, it strikes me that most of the quarantine restrictions and the social distancing measures that we're seeing rescinded temporarily on April 21st may well be coming back, may well be making a return, because if the mainland wants to ensure that we have dynamic zero COVID, and if it is indeed to open the borders with Hong Kong, then it cannot tolerate a Hong Kong that acts effectively as a puncture or a rupture, where you could see the entry of the virus and a potential escalation, which kind of saw already just then with the Shenzhen outbreak. So in short, Alan, what do you make of the chances of Hong Kong being able to walk this fine line and to balance both sides of considerations, or do you think we have to choose one approach in that sense?
I'll tell you, it's of course you're right. That's the dilemma, because you've got China on one hand, you've got the international community on the other hand, and you are losing. Some businesses are moving because they just can't operate with the quarantines. With bringing out executives, and it's now going on 3 years where many companies could not. The good news is, I do believe that China, as they said 3 weeks ago, had said, remember, Hong Kong, you are an international financial center. So China understands the problems, and that we do have to open the international border. My belief is that now that we have the numbers coming down, yesterday was under 1,000 cases in Hong Kong, which 964 or something like that that were infected yesterday. So I think that by this summer, I do believe that the numbers will continue to be low, maybe by June or July. And once the numbers are low, I do believe we will gradually start to open up to the rest of the world, because China needs us to open up to the rest of the world. With John Li there now, I think there'll be a trust, and it's something that he will realize that we need the international community, the banks and all that. Remember, most businesses are here not because of Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is basically 7.5 million people. We're a small market. They're here because of the businesses across the border, because of China. And that's why every major bank is here, every major company is here, and because of our common law system, our independent judiciary, and our low tax base. So that's something that companies will continue to have. Those companies that have moved to Singapore, predominantly their business is with Southeast Asia, not so much with China. If your business is mainly concentrating on China, you've got to be here. So I know it's difficult, and I believe that China will get it under control with whatever they're doing, or they might just realize that, like other countries did, that at the end of the day, that with Omicron it's not working, and it's like the flu, and it'll come every year, and that we just we won't say living with it, but we'll control. Because the problem I understand for China is that their healthcare system, they see what happened in Hong Kong, where our system crashed. And basically, that's something that John Lee will have to look at in the future to find a way that we can work with it. And so even Carrie Lam yesterday said that in her 11 o'clock address, that now that we have the isolation facilities, which we didn't have before, we can look at things a lot differently, because now we can isolate people if they come down with it. And before, we didn't have the space, we didn't have places to put them. We had some hotels, but not enough. And we have more than 70,000. They can go to 100,000 if they need for isolation facility. So I think we're learning along the way how to live with this virus, and it might come back every single year. So I really, really believe that it's not as black as people think, it's not as dark as people think. Oh my God, China has to open as well. They can't just remain closed for the rest of their life. They are going to be the international #1 country in the world to do business, for international business. They have to start allowing people in. They just need to get this under control and really understand it. And they're going through what every other country in the world went through. UK, US, Germany, France, every country went through it. They didn't realize, they thought it's the same thing, they can master it. But then at the end, they just threw up their hands and said, we're going to live with it now.
Thank you, Allan. I'm going to ask you sort of one further question as to take the host's privilege before we open up the floor to the audience questions. This is essentially one centered around reconciliation, because going back to the events unfolding over the past decade or so, especially the unrest and the violence in 2019, but also to a lesser extent 2016, it strikes me that what's needed here is a deep and structural form of reconciliation between the political establishment and a very angry and disillusioned bunch of youth. Some of them are arrested, some of them are lying low, so to speak, in the city. Others have left the city. And obviously those who violated and broke the law, whether it be through arson, through violence, through all forms of criminal activities, must be prosecuted and punished. I think that makes more than rational sense. But I guess the second, or the other side of the coin, is what could we do and what should we do as a collective in bringing them back into the fold of society and ensuring that they're not perennially alienated from the infrastructure and the economic chances that we see in Hong Kong. And I know you care a lot about this issue, so I just wanted to see if you have any particular thoughts on priorities and objectives for the incoming administration.
I think that, yes, unfortunately, because of the system in Hong Kong, as I said, one country, two system was an experiment that went through peaks and valleys and peaks and valleys. And so many young people were kind of influenced very much by these so-called pan-democrats who were really influencing. Apple Daily was another newspaper that was quite prevalent and really very anti-China. Jimmy Lai, who I knew when he first started, he used to be in my factory. I used to give him orders before he was in the media business. So I go back more than 50 years from him. And so I think that he's Jimmy Lai is basically was one of the agitators for all this, and it, of course, had a following for many young people, and who got brainwashed. And those that have been convicted that are in jail at the moment, and I understand, because I am a JP, Justice of the Peace, I do visit the prisons as well. They are now doing all those people that kind of were young people, you have 20, 21, 22, 23-year-olds who are in there. They're now doing a kind of reform plan for many of the young people who are really finding a way. And you can see many who are coming out now realizing, oh my God, I was misled. I was wrong. And so that's something that's really, really, really important. That they do come out. Some of them will still not be rehabilitated. It's all over the world. You've got people who have different beliefs all over the world. Some will leave Hong Kong, but more people will come. And I believe once, as we see, they see an opportunity for themselves, like the Greater Bay Area, which will open up and they have a better life. If you have a better life, if you have a better house, if you have a good job, you love the government. It's like Singapore, even though the laws are stricter, but the people in general, you ask most young people, they love the government, they love everything because they have a nice house and they have a good job and they see a good future for themselves. They get married and have kids and all that. That's all people want all over the world. And that's something that we didn't, because we had the so-called free system that was from the British, and there was a great divide between the rich and the poor. And so, that's a problem, and it'll take time to get better. But I lived through it when I was a kid in Montreal and Quebec. I was going to, the French wanted to separate Quebec from the rest of Canada, and the Parti Québécois. I was 6 years old, 7 years old, going to school, and they had bombs going off in the mailboxes. I remember just one block from my school, a bomb went off, which I just passed through about 15 or 20 minutes ago. And so, but eventually things did settle down when they lost, they put those people in jail, and it took a while. It's not going to be overnight. But again, if John Lee can really show that there's a future here for young people and old people, and people have a better life, and we can really narrow that divide between the rich and the poor. You don't have, listen, you have the same thing in the US. You have the have and the have-nots. It's the system in China really works for China. Harvard University did a poll about 8 months ago, and 92% of the people in China said that they love the government, they love their life, they're very happy. 92%. If you took that poll in the United States, or the UK, you'd probably get 40%. Hong Kong, you'd get 35%. So we have a ways to go to make Hong Kong a better place. And I agree that many young people, some won't be happy, but a lot of them will get re-educated in the school and realize that this was maybe a brief moment, that they got caught up in the wrong thing. And hopefully I do see a bright future for Hong Kong.
Thank you so much, Alan. So we're going to have a brief intermission, which is essentially a poll that Tanner Hill would like us all to fill out. So it's essentially a question on how are you feeling about the next government? This is a question that if everyone could answer. Julie, I can't answer because I'm a co-host, so I can't cheat. But yes, please do fill in the poll as we speak. And whilst we're at that, I'm going to open up the floor to questions. We're a very long queue of incredibly excited audience members. So without further ado, I'm going to read out Lewis's question, which is Hong Kong is an international city, but under the current Sino-American tensions, what new role should Hong Kong play? And under that, how do you tell the real story of Hong Kong and the rest of China to the Western world? So this is a question we got from Lewis. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Lewis, is a very good question. I get that all the time. I believe that in the past, Hong Kong was the international city, and people looked upon Hong Kong different to China, and because our system and all that. Obviously, as the world became much more polarized, and now we're living in a different world. We went from the Cold War, kind of going back into the Cold War, to globalization. But now we see with the Russian-Ukraine war, unfortunately, we see things changing now again, and countries going back into blocks, and of course, the West really worries a lot about China, although China is their biggest producer of product and to the rest of the world, but they worry about the growth of China because they really don't understand China. They still think of the communists. Communism is a very dirty word to a Western democracy, and they don't understand how you can live under that system. but yet, I think that at the end of the day, people can live with in Hong Kong. I believe the future will be one country now becomes first. People realize one country comes first, and Hong Kong will become more Chinese. It'll be an international city, more with Chinese characteristics than Western characteristics. And there's nothing wrong with that, because being attached to one of the fastest growing economies in the world, I'd rather be there than go through what's going on in the United States or some of the countries in Europe at the moment. It's and so the Western societies will continue to give bad reports about China and try to make their people feel that China is bad and China's communist, and not if the people went to China and saw what was going on in China and what a great life the people have, and in general, they'd realize that the system it's more socialist. Because China has capitalism, which is Huawei and Alibaba and the top companies, and Tencent, which are all very capitalistic originally, and then they have socialism, which they looks after the middle class and the lower class, which are the state enterprises and all that. And the system for 1.4 billion people really does work. Hong Kong, on the other side, is kind of one of the engines that is, because of our system that China uses to reach out to the rest of the world. But when Donald Trump was the president of the United States, he took sanctions against Hong Kong. Basically, he didn't care about Hong Kong, a small market, but all he thought was, I'm hurting China. So Hong Kong got caught up in the middle, and we will have a lot of this. It's the same as this BS about Xinjiang in China, whereby I know Xinjiang. I had factories there, in my previous life, and it certainly just is not a place where human rights are not followed or looked after. But some German guy had started to come up with something that people, that people are being imprisoned in labor camps and that kind of thing. And of course, the West took his name was, I think it was Adrian Zhang or something like that. And they took his rhetoric and ran with it. And the human rights groups and all that kind of tried to paint a bad picture of Xinjiang. But Hong Kong will unfortunately have to live through it as the West is against China. And we'll see if where China goes, with the policy of China, where it goes. We will not separate. We can't separate ourselves. Our strength is getting closer to China and being maybe an international financial center for the Greater Bay Area and for the rest of China.
Thank you, Alan. And Sam, I know you had a question. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, I do. Good day, Alan. I'm Sam Wong from Canberra, Australia. How are you, mate?
I'm fair. I'm well. How's Canberra, Australia?
Oh, it's wonderful.
Another country that
we have lovely weather here. Just like to first of all congratulate the wonderful dissertation you put on for the last hour or so. In fact, your speech should be broadcast for the rest of the world about what's really happening in Hong Kong. I'm serious. My observation for you is I understand how passionate, how loyal to the city of Hong Kong and China for promote of international standing and imaging for trade and enterprising. But I'm sad to tell you that I live in Australia for over 50 years, and I have regular contact, and I also have contact with other overseas Chinese in North America and Europe. The sad part is, after the riot, there is little positive awareness about the stability and also the contribution for the people of Hong Kong and also for China. There's no government support. In fact, we have over 19 overseas offices all around the world, from Los Angeles, Sydney, Brussels, and London. None of these high-ranking officials have done any positive promotion for about the stability and the prospect of investment for Hong Kong. I'm just wondering, from your point of view, I'm sure you heard many stories as well. How can we, the Hong Kong government, overcome this negativity from overseas because of the press and media being giving bad story about Hong Kong? Thank you.
Unfortunately, we are a victim of our own success because of China's success. And because it is for the West, they need an enemy. One thing I've learned about them, they need someone that they can bash. And right now, of course, for the West, the enemy is Russia. For the world, the enemy is Russia at the moment. But as soon as that war hopefully gets settled with Ukraine, it's in some way or form, hopefully sooner rather than later, with less deaths involved, the attention will then turn back to China because that's the way politics go. Look at Australia. You've lived there for 50 years. It breaks my heart because it's the biggest trading partner with China, Australia.
Absolutely.
But yet with your present government, Morrison is out of his mind. You know, he's adopted the West, the US, and basically what's the problem? You know, you're living in the Southern Hemisphere. Why not? Why team up with the United States against China, which Australia can? And look at such a big population, Australia of Chinese. It's
1.2 million.
You know. I know. It's ridiculous, and so I think that you know, I understand many of the people of the government, you know, the government departments abroad. Even if they say anything, I say it all the time. I did an interview for your Australian a few weeks ago, the Australian in the morning at 6 a.m. for I forget the channel, the Australian main channel, government channel. They asked me to do an interview. Yeah. And again, the moderator was very negative. Of course, you know, I did my normal positive, and I thought I did a very, very good interview defending China, defending Hong Kong. And I think that the only way is, I say, don't worry what the rest of the world thinks. You'll never change people's perception. If you provide a better life for your people, if we provide a better life for Hong Kong and go through the next 25 years, remember, we have a 50-year one country, two systems, and go through the next 25 years and really show that Hong Kong is really a great place to live, and and everyone in Hong Kong really has a good life and opportunity. Singapore, as I say, I'll go back to Singapore again, much more draconian laws and all that, but yet they have the respect of the world because people are generally happy. You don't hear, all this rhetoric coming out. So I really believe now getting rid of the stain, the pan-democrats that, these anti-Beijing groups that really were causing a lot of problems, really together with some of the foreign influence, was causing a lot of problems for our young people who are not educated with national education. We now have national education. We now have young kids saluting the Chinese flag and Hong Kong flag in the morning. So you're going to have another generation growing up understanding that China, we are Chinese, and we're not just Hong Kongese first, but we're Hong Kongese with Chinese characteristics. And I think that will, over the next number of years, as Hong Kong gets a better chief executive, a better life for people, that will show that Hong Kong, the system still works, because whether you like it or not, no matter what the system is here, people will still come, businesses will still come to Hong Kong and do business here because of China, not because of Hong Kong. So I don't worry very much.
Allan, it's really Hong Kong and China would have an honor to have you around as a Canadian Chinese, if I call that. And you've been wonderful to Hong Kong and China. Congratulations and well done. Thank you.
I'm a Chinese Canadian, Chinese first, then Canadian.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you for your excellent question and thoughts there, Sam, and thank you, Ellen. I just want to bring in here Pan's question. So Pan's essentially asking, so could you perhaps briefly comment on the impact on the rule of law in Hong Kong, Ellen, after the introduction of national security law and the reforms to the electoral system? And I think Pan's question is also centered around the fact that Mr. John Lee is now the only candidate for the CEO election. What are the implications of that for the political scene in Hong Kong and beyond? So over to you, Allan.
Okay. Well, as I said earlier in my dissertation, the security law brought stability to Hong Kong. And literally, if you read the security law and then read other security laws of other countries around the world, including US, UK, and some of the other countries, Germany, they're a lot more strict than Hong Kong security law. And so security law has really brought security back to Hong Kong, stability back to Hong Kong. Hong Kong businesses, at the time that the protests were going on and all these, well, some people died and, their negative publicity that was going around the world. I mean, I was doing so many interviews, CNN, BBC, showing the bad side of Hong Kong. And it looked like Hong Kong was up in flames at the time. And that was terrible. And so I do believe the security law really was necessary. As I said, out of 200 countries in the world, 120 countries have security law. Nothing wrong with it. It brings stability. John Lee will pass Article 23. That's one of his first things that he wants to do. We should have passed it in 2003. Again, countries need to live with laws. And that's something, as long as they're not draconian, which none of the laws, if you really look at the laws, none of them are draconian. Sedition, treason, all these things are things that every country has. And so you cannot say, oh, we're too much freedom doesn't work and too little freedom doesn't work. Something when you're in school, the students don't run the school. You have teachers, you have principals, there's rules, regulations, and you follow the regulations, and the education systems work in most countries. And so that's something that I believe in Hong Kong is not a problem. I think the security law did bring stability back to Hong Kong, and people can go on, do business, make money, do whatever they do, have a better life, and buy a nice house, and have a family. And really, and the good thing about that, Hong Kong is very, very safe. If I look around the world, I don't know where to begin. Almost every country, you see a gunman, you have guns, US, every day there's shootings and killings and all that kind of thing. So I really don't worry. I mean, Hong Kong really is a great place. My kids grew up here, they live here. I have grandkids now, and they're here. They have not gone abroad. To me, there's no better place in the world. Once you understand Hong Kong, and once we divide the rich, overcome the divide between the rich and the poor, I really do believe that things will remain. With John Lee going forward, I do believe that security will be a very important part, but still the International Financial Center will continue because that's something that is mandated, and we'll have very strong financial secretary, whether it's Paul Chan or who's the existing one or a new one. Make sure that the cabinet will be very strong from that respect. We have a lot of good brain power in Hong Kong and all the big banks in the world and all that. So that will all continue. Business will continue to thrive.
Thank you, Allan. And I certainly would like to echo your sentiments concerning the brain power that we have in the city and the fantastic potential there. I'm going to bring in Ken Chung to ask his question. Hi, Ken Chung. Hello.
Hi.
I think you're here. Could you unmute yourself if that's okay? Or I will have to find you. So yeah, you're still muted. Okay, no worries. We'll return to you later. Cam Y. So Cam Y has a question concerning the dependence of the Hong Kong government, I believe, so I'm just going to find the question. Apologies for that. Slight technical difficulties. It always happens. How do we deal with the dependence of the Hong Kong government on land sales revenue for its primary source of income to cover its expenditure, Allan? That's Sin Cam Y's question. So.
Very, very good question. Very difficult question, because obviously a lot of the problems that we faced caused the divide between rich and poor. So the high land prices, high land auctions, and that's helped Hong Kong reserves to really get over $1 trillion, and be very, very strong. That's helped Hong Kong, but it cannot not continue. We have to somehow balance out. Our tax rate is still very, very low, and really balancing out. It's not an easy question to answer, but we do have to provide more land and gradually bringing the land prices down, because the problem is if you do it too quickly, it creates negative equity for a lot of owners who will not be very happy. We've gone through it before, but we're kind of in a box. It was a successful product that the British had really introduced to Hong Kong. So I think something along the lines of slowly easing in more land, and if Hong Kong continues to thrive, it'll continue to attract new people. So your land price will be able to hold on. Will be able to hold on. Also potentially looking at, like some countries have had a small GST tax. Not much, but really working well to really understand what our spending needs to be done. And again, we have China in our backyard, and so I really think that between it, we can really overcome the system at the moment. That's something, again, that John Lee will have to look at with his people and really find a way to balance out the Great Divide, and that will then bring bring a better system for the government, a stronger system for the government, because you can only get cash from a few sources. Either raise the taxes very high, which will not be Hong Kong, or lowering, somehow finding a substitute for the land values, and it's by having more companies, collecting more tax from more companies, and balancing out in what you spend. It's there's no brain surgery to it. US, if you look at US, they just keep printing dollars, US dollars. It's basically worthless, but there is no alternative at the moment. And so people, the US dollar has no backing to it. They can't change it from gold to backing of oil, but it's a mess. The financial system in the world is a mess at the moment, with digital currency and cryptocurrency and all this new technology that's coming out. That'll be a problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Philip, you have a question. Hi, hello.
Hi, Allan. Great talk. I love it. Allan, I'm mindful of the political crossfire that's worsening between China and the US-led Western world. And Western world, by the way, includes Canada, of which you and I have a modicum of connectedness. You by virtue of your birth, and me by virtue of my involvement as mercenary president at that, of the Canadian Chamber over here. Okay. Now, as the rivalry and crossfire between Hong Kong or between China and the Western world is intensifying, despite national security law, despite the improved election systems and so on, as Hong Kong becomes more Chinese, as you put it, it's making it very complicated for the international community, especially multinational companies. And I've worked in a few multinational companies before, and they are facing perhaps a much more polarized Hong Kong community, polarized in a way that customers, employees, and Hong Kong people are, they cannot ignore China on the one hand, because it's a big market growing rapidly, and the growth accounts for 1/3 of the world's economic growth. But on the other hand, these companies are facing a much more uphill battle in Hong Kong. So how do you see the international business community, including the US and Canada and so on, behave in a Hong Kong post-COVID, post-Ukraine war, and post-election? How do you see them behave?
I think that the first thing is post-COVID. Remember, we've had 3 years of living with closed borders, and international companies have really had to 21-day quarantine. They've really had to kind of find an alternative, to survive, because not only, but the COVID was everywhere in the world. Their home countries were wherever they came from, US or UK, everybody was going through it. And so that kind of, and Hong Kong being the laggard and still having closed borders, where the rest of the world is now living with it and adopting, back to normal. I think that, once the border really does open, the international and then the China borders really start opening, you go back to then just concentrating not so much on the medical side, but we go back to the world. We join the world again, and Hong Kong does have its strong benefits because of the growth of China, because of the Greater Bay Area coming, all the new things that are happening. Business people love. When I was a young man, I had a trading company, and I built it up. Hong Kong was my head office. I was in the fashion business. I had 36 offices around the world, which I eventually sold 25 years ago to Li Fung. They were the largest. We were the second largest. But doing business in 36 countries, I learned how to do business in each country. And some of them were quite corrupt. Some of them, but my business people that came out from all over the world, we're the trading company. They didn't care. All they wanted was having their product made at the right price. They're business people, and they weren't involved so much in politics. So, as I'm saying, if China continues, which it will, to grow and technology and come up with it. Right now, China's becoming self-sufficient. U.S. has really tried to stop China's growth in technology with stopping selling of chips and semiconductors and all these important things. China is now rapidly building their own plants and financing young startups who really want to do their own businesses with chips and semiconductors and really making the technology grow. Look, China's now gone to the moon and become a competitor to the US and other countries in the world. So I think that eventually China will continue to grow, and their strength, everybody at the end, it's a necessary evil. You have to do business with them because the business people demand it. Being here at the Canadian Chamber, whether they like it or not. Yes, there's some people left, and yes, this is kind of a brain drain, but as soon as the borders reopen, more brains start coming, more young people, more people start coming out. From Lan Kwai Fong, I see it. I see the dynamics changing all the time, whether it's not people from overseas, it's many bright Chinese. We hear more Mandarin, more Putonghua being spoken in Hong Kong, and so I don't, your customer base changes as well. Listen, we went from the British, I used to have British customers all the time, and then after 97, many of the Brits left and it became Chinese, and their money is as good as the British dollar, more. They're richer than the Brits. And so I think honestly, Phil, don't worry. If you think too much, nothing will happen. Let the borders reopen. Let's get back to doing business, and Hong Kong will maintain its strong place in the world. And China will continue.
Thank you. Thank you, Allan. So Alexis Wong would like to ask on his behalf the following question, which is, Allan, how do you keep yourself calm reading most of the English mainstream media that are biased and anti-China, whereas most of where I presume, like most of us, these are the sources where we get most of our information when it comes to business, finance, and technology. How do we keep calm and carry on? So that's Alexis's question.
Alexis, I think I don't just read the local newspaper, the English newspapers. I am a newspaper hound. I read 6 newspapers a day, but I also have the Chinese press, which is very, very important for me because if you see the Chinese press and the English press, usually the stories are different, similar but different. And Chinese, of course, have much more information and much more of what's going on. For me, it's really important. Now, I don't read Chinese. I wish I did, but I have them translated for me. I have people that translate every day. And that's something that's very, very important. That really helps me to keep in tune with what's happening, or, watching Chinese TV or whatever. And I am with the Chinese community more. I'm kind of the voice for the international community, for the Western community, but I really do understand what's going on. And I understand the difference between both sides of cultures. I bridge both cultures. One side of me thinks Chinese, the other side tries to understand the Western mind. And, because Western culture is brought up with the so-called democracy and what else, which is not really democratic, but they're taught to think it's democratic. And then the Chinese, are favor China, the Chinese government. And so I don't worry so much about what what the US press says, or as I say, I do a lot of interviews for all of them, and they usually twist some of my words, or just split some of the different video that they take, and they take things out of context to show that it's not all pro-China or what I'm saying. But listen, for me, I tell it like it is. I guess I do interviews almost every day, for many, many media. And I just try, I guess that's why China really trusts me, because I do try to tell the real story.
Thank you. So as we come to the end of our wonderful discussion today, thank you so much for your time, Allan. I was just wondering, if you would have any parting thoughts or remarks that you'd like to share with the rest of us, really, before we conduct another poll in response to your fantastic words.
I mean, if I have to say my past remarks, especially to you, Brian, who's a young man and very bright, I can see, and have a great future ahead of you, just have confidence, because realistically, in the past, the East used to look to the West for everything. Send my kids to school in the US or UK or whatever, and of course, travel is important. Travel makes you smart. So I don't say isolate yourself, but I recommend to all the West in the future will be looking to the East. That will become much more prevalent and much more important. As China opens up more and more, which they are, and I'm talking post this COVID blip that we're going through. It's like being on an airplane with turbulence at the moment. Everyone holds on because they think the plane's going to crash, but at the end of the day, the plane comes out of the clouds and lands safely, and everybody comes out, claps for the pilot, and goes on holiday. And so I think that we will come out of this, and I just say to everyone, have faith, have confidence in China and Hong Kong. I believe that you will be well rewarded. I came out when I was 19 years old, a young man from Canada, and made this my home. And listen, I keep saying this to many young people, many old people. I'm rich enough. I could live anywhere else in the world. I choose to live in Hong Kong. My family the same. We can go anywhere. I don't find a problem with so-called democracy. I don't find a problem with anything. I just feel this is a great place, and it's one of the most beautiful places, and one of the best systems and the safest system in the world, and that will continue. So I say to you, no matter who the chief executive is, no matter what, the next 25 years, we've just lived the experiment for 25 years with ups and downs. The next 25 years, hopefully we learned from the first 25 years until 2047, and hopefully people have a much, much better life and much happier, and will continue to attract everyone. So just have confidence, and I promise you, you'll have a great future ahead for your children, for your grandchildren, and for everyone.
Thank you so much, Allan. It has been an absolute honor and privilege. Let us all please give Allan a round of applause, if that's all right.
Oh, Thank you. It's a pleasure to it's a pleasure to really speak to everyone and from all over. And I know it's late for some of you, but it's my pleasure. And just anything, I'm always available. May a go-to guy.
Thank you so much, Allan, and I hope you have a lovely weekend ahead of you. Thank you, and I think we have time for.
Happy Easter to everyone. Okay.
You too.
Thank you.
Take care, Allan.
Thank you, Allan.
Okay.
Let's go to Lan Kwai Fong soon.
Yeah. Well, we open up on the 14th next week, 21st next week.
Well, thank you, Allan.
Yes.
Thank you, Allan.
Thank you, Allan. Thank you, everybody.
To have you, and you really,
Thank you.
yeah, you really make the case that Hong Kong is a shining example of being an international business community. And then I know that you have a Jewish background, but you are attracted to Hong Kong, and you have very sharp business judgment, business acumen. You have to be successful. So we all believe, and at least I believe in your judgment about Hong Kong, and we have a very good future. And then I like the term Lan Kwai. I know that. How come you come up with such an ingenious name? Because as I understand that Lan Kwai meaning very beautiful and well-nurtured men and women, right?
Correct.
And then Hong Kong should be full of all these beautiful, well-nurtured men and women.
Well,
and that will be something we all look forward to. A Hong Kong with that people trust and love the place and have a wonderful future. So,
as I said,
so good to have you. And I must thank Lynette Zhang for introducing you to us, who is in the audience too. And then, and we have a big a community, and I think it's well over maybe 130 because we have people come in different times.
right.
And then we have also people, mostly Hong Kong origin people from all over the world. So nice to have you. And I think that we also have a remaining poll too, the last but not the least, something for what is like the 3 most urgent tasks for the incoming chief executives. So let's have the poll now. And thank you, Allan.
Okay.
Thank you, Allan. Take care and goodbye.
Take care.
Well, it's my pleasure, Lucy. Yeah.
Let's hope the polls would go through to John.
Yeah. And then you have you can make 3 choices out of the 7.
Hi, Liza. Hi. Okay.
Great. I think the poll results are in, and it seems that affordable, livable housing and enhancing our position as a business hub are the dual priorities alongside reopening the borders. So thank you, Allan, and thank you.
Take care. Great.
Happy Easter.
Okay. Great.